The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
The South Kesteven series is sponsored by Gainsborough Cycles 01427 617 752. For all your cycling needs, this is your one-stop shop located at 20 Ropery Road, Gainsborough, or online at gainsboroughcycles.com. There's a link in the description. Gainsborough Cycles, ask for Trevor Halstead. Hello folks, welcome back to South Kesteven for another week's run out here. Now, in the distance here, you can maybe see a tower that you should be familiar with. That's the radar tower that we talked about in Carlton Scroop. This is the next village down the A607 from Carlton Scroop. And it's got all sorts of things to talk about. We've got a church to cover, we've got a prisoner of war camp to cover, we've got a circus to cover, we've even got a railway station to cover. This is Honington. Honington, the dog place. All this week on TVI we're back in South Kesteven as we take on another batch in its northernmost reaches. We're on the lush grassy heathlands between Grantham and Sleaford with the Lincoln Cliff overlooking it all. Let's get started with the parish of Honington. Honington lies just north of the junction between the A153 and the A607, about 5.5 miles north of Grantham and 8 miles west of Sleaford. As a village, it's never had a great deal, and it still doesn't today really. Most of the interesting bits here are on its fringes. That said, the village still has a lovely church dedicated to St Wilfrid, an old school, and the site of a hall that was once lived in by James Hornsby, a former Justice of the Peace. Honington's roads are crossed in two places by the route of a very familiar railway line. That would be the Poacher line on its route between Grantham and Sleaford. At one of the crossings there was a station whose platforms remain in situ, but they've long since been disused. South of the other crossing there used to be a siding that led to an ironstone quarry. Then, to the south and east of it all, there's a perfectly preserved batch of earthworks, commonly known as the Camp or the Honington Hill Fort. Both titles as ideas are incorrect, and we'll explore what the remains actually are in this video. Otherwise, it's a nice little walk today. Let's go. Here we have the village of Honington as it appeared in 1900 on maps. Not a great deal has altered since these times. This has always been a small village, essentially laid out along 3 roads that radiate from a central junction. In the Domesday Book, Honington appears with 3 different names: Hondintone, Hundindune and Hundinton. There's no definitive idea for its name, but Hond or Hund at the beginning of these suggest it had some sort of connection to dogs. Indeed, on this map there are some kennels marked in the east, although they were likely to do with the mid-19th century Honington Hall and not anything Saxon, Viking or medieval. Note on this map you can see a few bits of note around Honington as opposed to in it. The thing that catches your eye straight away is the camp on the right. That's not a camp, nor is it a hill fort, as some others might tell you. Although it's known as the Honington Hill Fort, it's more likely to be a defended settlement. And yes, there is a difference. This village used to have an ironstone quarry as well. You can see there was a railway line that looped around Honington to the south and ended up at the quarry. That's long gone, and the line has been lifted. The main line through the place, though, is still very much here. If we zoom in, we can see what the village had a bit more clearly. It wasn't a lot. There was a school and a church, both of which still stand, but to the east was a big parkland that was occupied by Honington Hall. That's been demolished now, but clues to its existence are still around. And this is what it all looks like now. Note there's a change of road layout. The modern A153 now bypasses the village, joining the old road near the route of the ironstone quarry sidings. The main shape and layout of Honington hasn't altered though. Here's our route. We'll start at the railway station to the north, but we'll do that bit in the car. On foot, we'll begin at those old kennels and head west to the main junction. It'll then be a case of walking around the loop formed by the other two roads and the A607. Although that means it'll be a bit barren in places, it offers us some pretty decent countryside views. We'll finish off by talking about the hill fort, but we won't be walking to that. Getting to that is, apparently, a bit of a muddy experience at this time of year. Let's get this one started with Honington railway station, just to the north of the village itself. Honington station was on the Poacher line, the one from Grantham to Sleaford. However, it was regarded as a junction station, being only a few yards away from the Grantham to Lincoln line. It was closed for regular services on the 10th of September 1962, but was still occasionally used until 1965. The disused platforms are still in situ and can be seen from the level crossing where the line crosses this road. Honington station used to be close to another rail junction. Just to the south of this there was a siding that led to an ironstone quarry. The railway ran into a cutting where iron ore was tipped into trucks from a temporary tramway so that it could be transported elsewhere. Next to the station, there's a rather unusual landmark. These are the winter quarters of Hoffman's Circus. It's exactly what it sounds like. During the winter, this is where the circus goes to hibernate. This site has been in use for at least the last 40 years. Circus animals were once a common sight here. There's no phone number and it doesn't advertise, but these gravel paths lead into the site marked out like a scrapyard. It's full of caravans, trucks and billboards, and you used to be able to see elephants and zebras in cages. There are currently 12 large circuses with performing animals that tour Britain, along with 9 smaller ones. The Association of Circus Proprietors estimates that the number of visits to animal circuses in Britain is around 3 million a year, a figure that's disputed by animal welfare organisations. Now, opposite the circus site, and I'm sounding very excited about this, you'll find these. These are ruined buildings that were a prisoner of war camp. Now, when I was researching Honington, I found a website that told me about this, but it didn't tell me where it was. And I've literally just discovered where it is. Dead opposite the site of the circus's winter quarters. How about that? Our first task in Honington is to make our way along Main Street to the central junction where the 3 roads of the village all meet each other. This used to be the only way through Honington at one time until the A153 bypass was completed. That begins where the ironstone quarry sidings were. Our first stop in the village itself is Honington's old public elementary school for infants. This was built in 1863 at a cost of £200 and it could hold up to 60 children. However, the attendance was never that high. On average, this only got around 10. Today, the school is still used for educational purposes, but it's not a mainstream primary. Instead, it's a preschool, which goes by the name the Old School Nursery. Primary-aged children from Honington mostly attend school in either Barkston or Ancaster today. On the bend just after the school is a house called Hall Garth, and off the main street further eastwards there's a cul-de-sac called Old Hall Spinney. Those are big clues as to what used to be nearby. It was Honington Hall, which was demolished in the mid-1940s. Honington Hall was the seat of James Hornsby, a Justice of the Peace. Whilst it was never a massive country residence, it still commanded a sizable parkland, and the building itself had an Elizabethan-style observatory tower. It was all built between 1862 and 1863 of stone. Okay, so we've taken a left turn onto Church Grove, and it's not all that obvious that the church is actually up here, but thankfully there is a sign that points you in the right direction. There's no lit gate out on the road or anything like that. It just looks like someone's private drive, but then it splits. There's a split here, you see, and the drive goes off that way, and this way takes you to the church. The hall might not stand anymore, but the Church of St Wilfrid still very much does. This originally 11th century Anglican parish church is Grade 2 listed. It exhibits a combination of styles including Norman, Early English, and some small parts that are later. It consists of a chancel with a north aisle or chapel, a clerestoried nave, a porch, and a square tower of an Early English date, with a perpendicular parapet and pinnacles. The tower contains 3 bells. The original aisle or chapel was built by the Hussey family in Tudor times. At the western end of the chapel is a stone monument to William Smith, who died in 1550. Included on the monument are memorials to his wife, a daughter of Augustine Porter of Belton, and their 6 children. Nicholas Pevsner noted further monuments in his work, including a bust of Thomas Hussey and an architectural tomb to Dame Sarah Hussey. Also in here, there's a 17th century communion rail, a 1577 gilt beaker, and a paten and flagon by Benjamin Godfrey from 1732. On the floor of the chancel is a grey slab, formerly commemorating a priest whose effigy partly remains, but is now covered by a brass plate inscribed to John Hussey. He was a benefactor to both Honington parish and to Caythorpe, which we covered a little while ago now. After the church, you're then out into the countryside for a bit, as civilization seemingly stops. This road leads to the A607, which we're going to use to form a loop around the rest of the village and back to the start. There's not a lot in these parts, so it's time for some countryside shots. Okay, we're back to the little triangle, and that means we've completed the loop of Honington. From here, it's very simple. Just a straight walk back down here to where we began, and then we can leave this one behind. There is, however, one more thing that I want to talk about here in this episode, but you're going to get pictures for this, because apparently at this time of year, you don't really want to be going to this thing on foot. This is what it is. To the southeast of the village, there's an expanse of fields, but it's not all arable farmland. Venture out there and you'll find this, a well-preserved set of earthworks, usually marked on maps as a fort. Some say this is an Iron Age hill fort, but more accurately, it's a defended settlement. The hill fort idea isn't without a bit of logic. The site sits below and to the northeast of the highest point of Barkston Heath, so it's not exactly fenland we're dealing with here. It consists of a small, roughly rectangular set of banks and ditches, enclosing an area of around ½ hectare. The earthworks themselves comprise, from the inside outwards, an inner bank, a ditch, a larger central bank, a second ditch, and then a lower outer bank or counterscarp. There is an entrance through the eastern defences, and the ditches are still a couple of metres deep in places. The whole site is in remarkably good condition considering its exposed position. There's no doubt whoever created this wanted to keep people out, but it wouldn't have been hard to overcome these defences. The chances are this was used by farmers and not by any sort of military group. Interestingly, there have been finds from the site which don't tally with its age. In 1691, a hoard of Roman coins were found in an urn here. The Romans were certainly around here because Ermine Street runs about a mile to the east, but there's no substantial evidence to prove they ever used this. And so we reach the end of Honington, everyone. That one was pretty easy, all things considered. Tomorrow we're going to be ramping it up a bit because we're going to a village that has far, far more. We'll be seeing the Witham again tomorrow too. It's been a while. Hello folks, welcome back to South Kesteven once again. Now, today and tomorrow you're going to get two for the price of one, effectively, because I'm about to do a continuous walk between two villages which are pretty much conjoined together. They even share several facilities. I've just driven past the village hall to get to this starting point, and it even says on the sign outside it belongs to both villages. You'll see that at the end of this episode. So where are we then? Well, I'm right next to the River Witham here. There's a lovely little bridge, and this is going to be the start point and the end point for this entire walk. Welcome, first of all, to Barkston. Barkston, Barky's farm. Today on TVI we're in Barkston as we turn our attention to not just one village but two. For as long as many people around here can remember, the two parishes of Barkston and Syston have been like conjoined twins. They share a parish council, and that's not all they have in common. Sitting as they do on the A607, Barkston and Syston also share a village hall and a school, as well as a car park on Station Road, which gives you access to one of the best spots along the course of the River Witham. The pair are so close together, they're like inseparable twins. And that's why today will be part 1 of a 2-part walk, where I'll be continuously ambling from one into the other. With Barkston up first, we've got most of the main bits and bobs to cover here. Barkston has a church, a school, a pub and a petrol station, all in a little cluster at one end. We should not be surprised by that layout. In the 1930s, the A607 was built through the two villages and it changed the way Barkston appears now. This was a village that was aligned from east to west, but now with the new road it's more of a north to south sort of affair. That would explain the extremely narrow parish boundaries which go east and west for a long way. The west has the site of Ringstorp, which is a DMV, but it's what's in the east that's way more interesting, RAF Barkston Heath, where a certain Captain Mannering once worked. Let's go. Here we have Barkston as it appeared on maps at the turn of the 20th century. It lies about 4 miles north of Grantham on the A607 and just south of the junction with the A153 to Ancaster. You wouldn't necessarily know from these maps that it was near such a major intersection. The village is named in the Domesday Book as Barchestune, which probably means the farmstead of a man called Barker or Barkey. The deserted medieval village of Ringstorp lay just to the west on the far side of the River Witham. That too was mentioned in the Domesday Book. Note here how the landscape around Barkston was fairly nondescript. It was all fields. To the east there was, and still is, a huge expanse of land called Barkston Heath, where eventually a World War II airfield would be established. The west was a little less of note, crossed as it is by the River Witham. The south, though, was dominated by the massive parkland of Syston Park Hall. The boundary between the two villages was literally the edge of that park, and it still exists today, despite the fact the two villages share so many amenities, and of course, a parish council. Let's have a look in a bit more detail at the village we're about to walk through. You can see here there was one main street, with most if not all of the important bits located along it. Marked here you can see there was a school, a church, and a pub called the Stag. All three of those are still here, although the school has been rebuilt since. To the north, on the road to Honington, there's a block of almshouses, which are also still there. So too is the Methodist Chapel on West Street, but that's no longer in use. In all, Barkston was pretty small, all sort of bunched up into one area with very little on the outskirts. The A607 has definitely changed how Barkston looks from these times. It's encouraged more residences to be built on the fields to the north, and now the orientation has altered. And here you can see the difference. The A607 has completely changed the layout of Barkston beyond all 19th century recognition. Now the main road runs through it from north to south like an absolute beast, and newer stuff has grown up along it and around it. The route we'll take around this one then is sort of an up and down job. We'll start on the border with Syston at the river before heading to Barkston House on the A607. West Street will then take us along what used to be part of the main drag of the village. Returning to the A607, we'll then go up to the petrol station and the playing field before using the old road from Honington to reach the almshouses, the church and the school. At that point, we're back onto Main Street and it runs back to the A607, passing the Stag pub on the way. That's where the walk will end for now, but tomorrow we'll see its conclusion as we continue on into Syston and work our way back to the start point here via the banks of the River Witham. We've got some other bits to cover in the car too. It'll be a fun one this. Let's go walking. First up on this walk, which will take us between the two villages, is Barkston House. On the maps we saw a moment ago, this area was labelled as Manor House on the site of a manor house. A little confusing maybe, but there's been some rebuilding here it seems. Barkston House is the place that currently occupies this land, so one would assume it's this that we could see on the map. Between the house and the River Witham though, which passes the rear of this property, there are some patchy earthworks visible on Google's overhead maps. That would suggest that Barkston House doesn't take up the entire plot once occupied by the former manor, but it still sprawls out rather dominantly at this edge of the village. Now interestingly, this place is a listed building, but you might be fooled by what that listing says. You see, this was built as a private house in the 17th century, and since then it's been added to a bit. For a time though, it became Barkston House Hotel, and that's what it's listed as. However, this is no longer a hotel because it's reverted back to its original residential status now. The next landmark is a former Methodist chapel on West Street. This was built by the Wesleyans in 1832 and lasted for 170 years, finally closing down in 2002. The congregation continued to meet in the village hall until 2013. Like Barkston House, the chapel now appears to be residential. West Street runs in a northwesterly direction towards the River Witham. You can walk up to it, but it's a long way. At the top there used to be a watermill on the banks of the river. Now as far as I know it's still there, albeit not crushing corn or whatever else it used to these days. Or at least it's appeared residential on Google imagery. If there's anyone living in that right now, I'll be amazed, because as you can see, the windows and I assume a door, which was at this end, have all been blocked up now. So maybe it's just used as a store, or maybe there's an entrance around the back. I have no idea. But anyway, it's definitely not a chapel anymore. Now we're on the A607, which is the main road through Barkston. The current route of this road dates from the 1930s, when its course was straightened, widened, and generally improved. The A153 Honington bypass, which we mentioned yesterday, came along at that time too. In Barkston, the road is far from being a bypass now, but it did begin as one. That's why in terms of buildings, in many places along here, it appears a little unbusy. The original route through the village used Honington Road and Church Street instead. On the new route today, there's a petrol station which also has a shop, currently a Londis. It's been a spa in the past too though. These are the only retail facilities in Barkston, but of course at one time there would have been plenty of other shops and trades. It's a familiar story. The north of the village is the area that's seen the most in the way of modern development. There are several small cul-de-sacs off the Hough Road, like for example the Lees and Thorrell Close. Let's walk through some of these next as we make for the playing field. Yeah, so the housing continues a little bit further north there, but this is as far north as we're going. To be honest with you, it's all sort of housing anyway, it's probably not much of interest. So we've cut through Thorold Gardens and we found our way to the playing field. This is next. Sports-wise, Barkston has a cricket club, an indoor bowls team and a football team. The latter play in the Grantham and District League, and they do so on this very playing field. This little field also features the local playground, and in general, it's all well used by everyone. On the junction of the old and new roads through Barkston, there's a huge cemetery. Officially, this is known as Barkston and Syston Cemetery and was opened to cater for burials from the two parishes when both churchyards became full. On the old maps at the beginning, this was just a field. The war memorial for Barkston isn't in this cemetery, instead it's in the churchyard. There are, however, several Commonwealth war graves in here, thanks in part to the fact that we're not far away from a World War II airfield, RAF Barkston Heath. Now, to the east of the village is RAF Barkston Heath, which long-time viewers may recall we mentioned in Ancaster a long time ago. The base straddles the border between the two parishes, with at least half of the airfield being in Ancaster. It's an active airbase, so it's pictures for this one. Officially, Barkston Heath is a relief landing ground under the command of RAF Cranwell. It's currently the base of No. 57 Squadron's B Flight of the RAF's No. 3 Flying Training School. That provides elementary flying training for both RAF and Royal Navy students. For a period between 1995 and 2010, Barkston Heath operated the Slingsby Firefly. That was followed by the Grobtutor T1, which operated between 2010 and 2018. Now, these are all current activities, but Barkston Heath was built way back in the 1930s. Originally constructed in 1936, it was initially used as a satellite station for RAF Cranwell, and during World War II, it was made available to the United States Army Air Force. It was earmarked for troop carrier units transferring from Sicily to participate in the cross-channel invasion Operation Overlord. During its time with the Americans, Barkston Heath was referred to as USAAF Station 483. The first US personnel arrived in 1943 in the February from Sciacca, Sicily, along with most of their Douglas C-47 Skytrains, although not all of their aircraft were in place until a month later. These new occupants were the 61st Troop Carrier Group, which remained in Barkston until 1945, when it transferred to an advanced landing ground at Abbeville in France. Its squadrons, though, went to RAF Chipping Ongar, from where they participated in Operation Varsity. An increased demand for theatre air transport brought the 349th Troop Carrier Group from Bearfield, Indiana in early 1945, but that group only remained here for 3 weeks before moving to Rove Amy, again in France that same April. The USAAF returned control of the airfield to the Air Ministry when the war ended. Barkston then lived a sort of limbo-like life for a while until 1983, when the A Flight 25 Squadron with Bristol Bloodhound surface-to-air missiles arrived from RAF Bruggen in Germany. They stayed until 1989, and 6 years later the Joint Elementary Flying Training School relocated to Barkston Heath from RAF Topcliffe in North Yorkshire. The school was equipped with those civilian-registered Slingsby Firefly trainers, 18 of them in fact. RAF Barkston Heath's site extends to 224 hectares, that's 550 acres. It has 3 runways, measuring 1,868, 1,319 and 1,280 metres respectively. All 3 are constructed from asphalt and are laid out in a typical A-shape. The airfield has limited facilities and relies on RAF Cranwell for support. The main building here is named after Lieutenant Commander Eugene Esmond, a distinguished Fleet Air Arm pilot who was a posthumous recipient of the Victoria Cross. Out of 6 T2 type hangars constructed during World War II, only 2 remain on the site. There was once a Type B1 hangar here too, and the airfield still contains the decaying remains of an English electric Canberra at its northern edge. During World War II, Arthur Lowe, the actor who played Captain Mannering in the television series Dad's Army, was stationed at Barkston Heath with the Royal Army Ordnance Corps. He had the task of servicing searchlights. And well done to everybody who successfully guessed RAF Barkston Heath for the Guess Where I'm Going thing that I do on Facebook occasionally. Now, back into the village again. Behind me there you can see the old police house. And if we go a little bit further down this road, the Honington Road, we come to another block of houses which are definitely interesting, shall we say that. They're called Hickson's Almshouses. Let's check them out. On the Honington Road, near its junction with Minnett's Hill, are these lovely buildings. These are the Hickson Almshouses. They were built in 1640 originally, but rebuilt in 1839. To this day, they still provide homes for local elderly people, and a great addition to Barkston they are. Next, it's the church, which is dedicated to St. Nicholas of Myra. He was a philanthropist bishop from whom the legends and customs of Santa Claus derive. Did you know that? Although there are entries for Barkston in the Domesday Book, there is no mention of a church here in that document. However, there was definitely a church here by the middle of the 12th century, as demonstrated by a different sort of record. There was a disagreement between the incumbents of Barkston and Honington over the payment of church offerings by the tenants of the Priory of Stixwold. It related to some land that some nuns owned in Honington. The agreement led to a settlement between the two churches. Barkston was to receive the tenant's wax scot. That was a duty paid to the church for its candles. It also received a secondary mortuary fee. So we know from this that the church was in existence back then, but whatever form it took in the 12th century, it's now been lost. Though the crocketed spire on the west tower here is 15th century, the rest of the tower, the nave, the south aisle and the chancel are all much older. They date from the 13th century. Also a 15th century date, however, are the south chapel off the chancel and the porch. There was some restoration work here in 1865 and again under C.H. Fowler in 1887. The narrow west window in the tower is Romanesque. Around the corner on Church Street, the next thing to see is the school, adjacent to St Nicholas's. This caters for pupils aged 5 to 11 and it serves an area much larger than just Barkston Village. As we learned yesterday, this takes children from Honington, but several other village children come here too. This serves Barkston, Syston and even parts of Grantham. That's one reason why its name is Barkston and Syston C of E Primary. There is another reason why, and to understand that, we have to go back to the year 1718, when two endowments were set up. In Barkston, a Mrs. Selina Towers provided an endowment of £27 per annum for the schooling of poor children, whilst in Syston, the Dame Margaret Thorold charity provided £5 a year for education there. Both schools were rebuilt in the 1830s. Barkston's was built in 1835 on land donated by Mrs. Hougham Newton. It's the site of this, the modern school. In 1969, Barkston and Syston schools merged and they moved into a brand new building. They've had the joint title of Barkston and Syston ever since. Okay, opposite the school, there's this little building, which I imagine was some sort of shop a few years ago. Obviously not now, it seems to be a private residence of some kind. Now there is a track that goes down the side of that shop and leads onto a little street which basically forms a loop back round onto this road. But as you can see, there's a gate there and I don't know whether I'm allowed to use that, so I won't be going up there onto that street. Instead, I will be going this way, towards the pub. Barkston has just the one pub and it's called the Stag. This has been here for centuries. It was built in the 17th and has occupied this prominent position ever since. It used to see a lot of passing trade before the road was rerouted. Not so much now maybe, although it does still get a fair bit. This is an Everard's pub, and those in the pub business know it's hardly a secret that if you apply to run one of these, the interview process is what you might politely describe as thorough. The Stag is run by the Loveridge family, and it took them 8 years to get behind the bar. The Everard's interview process, though, is not the reason why it took them 8 years. Their story is instead one of patience and good fortune. The Loveridges worked in the catering trade beforehand, and in quiet moments they often wondered what it would be like to have their own pub. So in 2006 they rang Everard's to look into the possibility of running a pub. They were interviewed and Everard seemed to like them, but it wasn't long before they had second thoughts. It was nothing to do with the pub, it was their 3 teenagers who had all got exams looming at the time. So they politely backed away, but come 2014, with all 3 in work or at university, they got back in touch with Everard's, who remembered them and still had their interview notes. The process picked up more or less where it left off 8 years beforehand, and this pub has been fabulous ever since. Just before we bring the walk to a close, we have one final landmark on the A607. This is the Village Hall, a shared facility between the 2 villages of Barkston and Syston. It would be so easy to confuse this with Syston Park Hall, but that's something different. This is a communal venue open almost every day for a collection of things like mother and toddler groups, Pilates classes, dance classes, the local rainbows and brownies, and even short mat bowls on Monday and Thursday afternoons. There's always something going on in here. And right outside the village hall we've got a parish notice board. Ideal time to leave one of these cards because obviously this is right on the border between Barkston and Syston, so hopefully everybody will see this. So here we go. There we go. That's these 2 villages done. Well, one done. I'm heading towards the second one now. This kind of direction is where we're going. So that's Barkston, everybody, but tomorrow we have another village to cover that's joined to it to the south. Now, to get to that, we're going to continue south on foot, using the A607. To get back again, I used a footpath alongside the River Witham, which was both handy and scenic. However, there is one final piece of Barkston that we have to cover, which I did after completing the second part of this walk. So, imagine we've walked it already, and we'll get in the car next. We're off to find the railway station and the site of a DMV. Travelling east away from the village, we're heading for Barkston's border with Marston, which we'll see later this week. If you drive this road, you'll pass a couple of things that also fall within the boundaries here. One of them is that deserted medieval village that goes by the name Ringsthorpe. Ringsthorpe lay just to the west of Barkston on the far side of the River Witham. It was mentioned in the Domesday Book, and the latest archaeological discoveries from it date from the medieval period. The last documentary mention of Ringsthorpe came in the 14th century. There's not a lot left of the village now. Traces of its foundations can be seen in 2 closes on the western side of the Witham, whilst aerial photographs show faint markings in 2 other fields. Pottery finds at Ringsthorpe were chiefly green glazed and came from St Neots. Just after Ringsthorpe, the road runs into the railway line which we met yesterday, and this is the site of Barkston Station. It was located near the Barkston South junction of the East Coast Main Line and the Poacher Line. It was on the Great Northern Railway main line near to the now realigned junction with the lines to Sleaford and Lincoln, which is known as the Allington Chord. The station was closed for passengers in 1955 and to goods in 1964. It's been demolished now, leaving no trace today of its existence. And that will bring us to the end of another episode in South Kesteven. So now you'll have to imagine we're back at the A607 and on foot as we enter the next village. It won't be a long one, but it will feature some motorsport history. Get your engines started, guys. Hello folks, welcome back to South Kesteven once again. Now yesterday I left you in sort of this position here with the A607 running alongside us. Now if you carry on down the A607 you will of course get to Grantham, but at this point the road splits into two pieces. This is the old road through this next village. This is how you got to Grantham in the past. Welcome to Syston. Syston, large stone. Today on TVI we're going to complete the walk we began yesterday in Barkston as we enter the village and parish of Syston. The village is a lot smaller than its northern neighbour, but the land area it covers is arguably a lot larger thanks to the huge Syston Park. Syston can be split into two distinct areas. You have the village itself, which is little more than a cluster of buildings around the church and the old route of the A607, and then to the east you have the park, which is so big you could fit at least 10 Syston villages within it and still have room to spare. The whole thing is around 3 miles to the north of Grantham, situated between Barkston to the north and Belton, with its own huge parkland, to the south. There can be no doubt that driving through this one is a really quick experience, but there's a lot of history to it. Syston Park used to contain a grand mansion built in 1775. It was the seat of the Thorold baronets, who had moved there from Cranwell. At least 3 of their number served as High Sheriff of Lincolnshire, and so it was fitting they had a house worthy of that stature. The house no longer stands because it was demolished not long after World War I, but Syston Park would soon become famous for another reason: motorsport. There was once a Grand Prix style circuit in the park that attracted some big names in the 1930s. So start your engines and let's go racing. This map might look a bit familiar to you. This is the same one we used for Barkston, and it shows quite clearly just how close the two villages are to one another. You can get, very easily, between Barkston and Syston, and you don't even have to break sweat. This map also shows the extent of the huge Syston Park very well. It dominates the eastern portion of the parish, whilst the village itself barely registers. In effect, Syston village occupies the road that runs down the edge of the park, and that road is now a bit different to what you see here. In the 19th century, the road through Syston was a bendy affair. There was a sharp left turn and then a right turn near the church. This was straightened out at some point, but when the new A607 came along in the 1930s, Syston was completely bypassed. These days, driving through Syston takes you past the park as the old route did, but you don't touch the village at all. The new route goes between them, with 99% of the village now sitting on the old, almost redundant loop that was left behind. I say almost redundant because you do still need to use that road to get to all of its features. Barring the road layout, Syston as a village hasn't changed a lot from these times. It still has its church, and the school you see here also stands as well, although now it's a private house. This map also shows you where the population is. The vast majority of Syston residents still live on a dead end called the Drift, which branches from the old main road. To the west is another dead end, River Lane, which runs to the Witham, and that's not altered one jot. So this is what it all looks like now, very similar in many regards, but you can clearly now see how the route of the A607 has bypassed it all. Now Syston is the sort of place you spend seconds travelling through before you hit Belton. We're not going to be quite that quick here though. Our route through this one is a simple one. We can't access Syston Park, it's off limits even though the house that occupied it is no longer there. So instead we'll stick to the village and we'll enter the place using the old road from Barkston. Almost immediately we'll pass the old hall and the old school. We've then got to wind our way to the church using the old new road. That'll make sense in a bit, before then heading to a footpath that runs to the Drift. From there we'll go to River Lane and use a path alongside the river bank to get back to Barkston. A pretty simple route, all in all. Before we even take one step into the village, let's get Syston Park and the history of its house out of the way first. We cannot access the park at all. It's totally private, despite the fact that the main residence was demolished a century ago, and some of it is now in agricultural use. The massive confines of the park used to contain a big mansion. Simply referred to as Syston Park Hall, it was built in between 1766 and 1775 to the designs of John Lanwith. It was erected as the country seat of the Thorold baronets, who had relocated here from Cranwell Manor. The 9th and 10th baronets both served as High Sheriff of Lincolnshire in 1778 and 1822 respectively. In 1822, the 10th baronet commissioned the architect Louis Villamy to build a library, which was then richly stocked with rare books and manuscripts, including a copy of the Gutenberg Bible. The Thorold baronets would continue to be associated with the house until the death of the 12th baronet, Sir John Henry Thorold, in 1922. Arguably, Sir John was maybe the most famous of the Thorold bunch actually. He was a Conservative Party politician. Upon the death of his father, the 11th baronet, in 1866, he succeeded to the baronetcy and inherited the family estates, including Syston Park. The year before, he'd been elected to Parliament as the MP for the borough of Grantham, although he didn't stand again in 1868. As well as being an MP, Sir John was a motorsports enthusiast and used Syston Park to bring his passion to life. He held a hill climb here in 1906, the 12 horsepower class of which was won by a T.W. Mays. His son, Raymond Mays, went on to become a famous racing driver. Sir John died in 1922 and the contents of the house were dispersed via a sale for the second time. A sale had already taken place in 1884 after the time of Mary Ann and Sir Charles Ogle. This time the house was demolished soon afterwards. Most of it came down between 1925 and 28. However, a small portion remained, and it was to be owned by Lord Barnby of Blythe Hall, who thought it was worth preserving on architectural grounds. Also preserved was the motorsport activity, because Syston Park became a Grand Prix-style racetrack. In 1926, a circuit was created from the estate road and motorcycle races were held on it until the 1930s. At first, these were unaffiliated, but soon Syston Park was attracting crowds of up to 30,000 people, and legends such as Stanley Woods, C.J. Williams and Tommy Cann. Even Raymond Mays returned in 1934 to test his new Voyeuret class racing car ERA R1A. The following year, in 1935, Oxford and Cambridge universities held the intervarsities at Syston. The 1930s was certainly a good time to be a racing fan around here. World War II brought it all to an end in 1939, but just recently vintage cars and motorcycles have returned to Syston Park once again. Nowadays there's a regular event called the Syston Park Speed Trials, which were established in 2016. Oh, and there is one part of the park that the public can access, by the way. This is the Syston Park Farm Shop, which is just off the A607. It's open 6 days a week and also has a cafe, although that's closed on Mondays. Call in here for traditional Lincolnshire dishes and game from the park farm. Right, let's get going with the village. Now, before Syston Park Hall was ever a thing, there was a much older building that served as a country house. This is the Old Hall, one of the first buildings you see as you enter the village from Barkston. It's a small country house built mainly in the 17th century, although it's had some major alterations, mainly dating from 1830. It's built of both ironstone and limestone rubble. This was the forerunner to Syston Park Hall and was lived in by the Thorolds. They still own it today. On the east front is a copy of an elaborate late 16th century porch, similar to that at Harlexton Manor. Above that are the arms of the Deline family in something called a strapwork cartouche. Not far away from that, there's the old school. Yesterday we learned about how Syston and Barkston schools merged with one another, giving us the joint school in Barkston today. Before that merger, this was Syston's school building. It was erected in the 1830s. Both the school and the adjoining schoolmaster's house were built with funds from the Dame Margaret Thorold charity, established in 1718 to provide the poor of the village with an education. Nobody's totally sure of where the original school was, but this served Syston until 1969. 10 years previously, in 1959, discussions about its future had begun, with ideas mooted about the merger with Barkston. It took a long time, but it eventually happened, and the new school opened in an extension to the existing school in Barkston. Syston's old school has been a house ever since. Okay, so just after the school you go round a bend, and the road through Syston has always been quite bendy, but it used to be a little bit more sort of cut and dried than it is these days. These are gentle bends. There used to be a sharp bend here instead, but it's no longer there because there's a tennis court in the way of all things. So we're going to walk around this tennis court and explain what happened to the road. To the church then next, and to get to it you have to walk around this tennis court. Yes, you heard that right. You see, the road through Syston used to be a bit different to how it is today. After the school there used to be a sharp left turn, and the road ran right across the area where this is today. It then turned right again afterwards and continued towards Belton. At some point the bend was taken away and replaced by a straighter route. The remaining portion of land would become the court at some point thereafter. And so St Mary's Church sits west of the A607, tucked away down a short dead-end track. This road is so little used that it sometimes has a grassy bank down its middle and two concrete strips either side. It's like something you perhaps see on the west coast of Ireland. This church dates mainly from the 12th century Norman Romanesque period. Indeed, Nicholas Pevsner's work points to Saxon-type shafts and heads, which may indicate earlier origins. Certainly, the southern doorway is assigned to the 11th century, retaining a lintel from that early period. Norman features definitely identified here include the chancel arch, the windows of the nave's southern face, and the northern arcade. Work to alter the church began as early as the 13th century, when a pointed arch was inserted into its south doorway. However, most medieval alteration came during the Perpendicular period. The buttresses and pinnacle top to the western tower were added to its Norman core in the early 15th century, whilst the clerestory was inserted to improve internal lighting. As is customary, the Victorians made their usual intervention, and here it came in the early 1860s to finalise today's church. The main entrance is at the southern end alongside an impressive limestone wall. Once within that, there are no obstacles for the photographer or for filmmakers like me. So if you walk to the back of this church, you'll find there's a little extension to the churchyard here, and in it you've got this stone monument. I'm assuming that's a war memorial. There is actually a circular tablet war memorial on the side of the church. Don't know whether you saw it in that last shot there, but yeah, I'm assuming that's what that is just there. It's otherwise a dead end. We can't go any further. It doesn't go out onto the A607. So we've got to turn around here and go back. So through the churchyard we go again, and we're heading for something called the Drift. And so now we have to make our way around the rest of the village via the old main road, the Drift and River Lane. Most properties in this tiny village are along the Drift or off the dead-end lane that leads to the church. Like most Lincolnshire villages, arable farming formed the backbone of the economy here at one time. Having been largely owned by the Thorold family, the needs of their estate dominated its employment, and so there are lots of estate workers' cottages here. Modern developments have been few. In fact, you could narrow it down to just the route of the East Coast Main Line really, which passes through the western part of the parish without granting Syston a station. Being fair, it's way too small to have ever warranted one. Syston is around 40 metres above sea level, with eastern views here dominated by the Lincoln Cliff, the Jurassic limestone, which rises relatively steeply to a local high point of 123 metres on Barkston Heath. The eastern border is marked by High Dyke, the ancient Roman route of Ermine Street. At just under 1,900 acres, Syston Parish has typically supported a population of around 200 parishioners. That was in complete contrast to Domesday times, when Syston was an important settlement, with enough population to place it amongst the top 20% in the whole country. And so to finish with, we have the simplest of tasks. In order to get back to Barkston, we need to follow the course of the River Witham, northwards to the car park where this walk began yesterday. It's a bendy, windy route, but the scenery is pretty good. That's a beautiful walk alongside the Witham, by the way, people. It's amazing how the countryside just resonates so much with me, to be honest with you. I could look at that view all day. I don't know about you. Anyway, we're nearly at the end of this walk. Here's the bridge over the Witham, which will take us back to where we started yesterday in Barkston. And this is where we started. This is called the Barkston picnic site, as you can see here. Barkston picnic site. And it's got a nice little board there, information board, which tells you about the villages of Barkston and Syston. If there's anything more to find out about them, maybe that's the place to go. So that's Syston, folks, not to be confused, by the way, with the other Syston in the East Midlands. How many of you clicked on this video expecting the town in Leicestershire? Well, that'll be coming soon. Tomorrow we're off to find another village on the Witham, one with a further Thorold link or two. Welcome back to South Kesteven, everybody. Now I'm beginning this episode at a solar farm. Now we've seen loads of these in our time and they are very controversial things. People have opinions on them that basically range from why are they taking up so much valuable farm space to we need other ways of making energy. Well, in this case, this solar farm right here is actually on a piece of land that wasn't actually doing anything. So if anyone complains about this one, they'd be wrong to. You can find it in Marston. Marston Marsh Farm. Today on TVI we continue through South Kesteven as we enter the parish of Marston, slowly working our way back across the district to the west. Marston can be accessed via a long straight road off the A1 near Long Bennington or from Barkston via Station Road. Marston is a nice little village laid out in an almost perfect square. There are several landmarks here which bear relevance to the mighty Thorold family, the same mob that occupied Syston Park Hall, as we learned yesterday. Loads of things around this village carry the Thorold name. Perhaps one of the most interesting would be the gorgeous Victorian school built in 1861. It still gets some support from the Dame Margaret Thorold charity, which was set up way back in the early 1700s. Another is the pub, the Thorold Arms, now a community-owned venture. South of the village there's a lot of farmland, but not all of it is used by the local farmers. In fact, in recent years, one farm in particular has been very willing to give up some of its land in order to aid the UK's energy generation sector. I'm talking about Marston Solar Farm. With 19,000 solar panels sprawling across the Lincolnshire landscape, some might argue it's taking up valuable farmland. However, in Marston, that's not the case, as we'll discover. We have a hotel and a watermill to see here, and a fine church with a tall brooch spire. Let's get walking. Here we have Marston as it was in 1900, and straight away you notice how open the landscape around here is. Marston is certainly not a village that's going to break any records in terms of its size. It's a small one, all clustered around 4 central roads. Its name gives us a bit of a clue as to why. As with other Marstons we've seen on our travels, this was Marsh Farm, and so you can imagine the big open skies and flat landscape this would have once been. It would have been wet, and therefore not all that great for habitation. Drainage, though, turned it into farmland. Not all of the farmland here is high-grade agricultural. True, there's a lot and it does get used, but historically Marston was more about milling. Its location next to the Witham meant it was a great place for it, and there were 3 mills in close proximity, 2 here and 1 in Hougham. If we zoom in, you can see one of the mills here. We'll be walking to that one on this route because it still stands. It's no longer milling anything, but it's a brilliant little house now and still has some of the mill machinery from the 1850s. The mill is a bit of an anomaly given its watery location. The rest of Marston was all built up around 4 roads that form a misshapen rectangle: Main Street, Pinfold Lane, Barkston Road and School Lane. Almost all of the main features on those roads are still standing, except for one. That would be the old Methodist chapel that used to be on this corner. It's disappeared now, but the school, the church and the pub on this corner are all still here. Marston Hall has been here since 1380 in various guises, and it's going nowhere fast. That's probably the most important building here. And time hasn't altered the place a lot. Marston is still the same misshapen rectangle it ever was, and really the only difference now would be the amount of houses around its edge. Gaps have been infilled and there's some cul-de-sacs, but essentially we have the same village. So the route of this one is going to be very, very easy. After starting to the southwest at a solar farm on Tollbar Road, we'll drive to the village and walk around the 4 sides. The only times we'll need to deviate are for Mill Lane and for Bridge Street at the end, where we'll go to the church. Let's go! So let's get things going here with something that certainly wasn't on those maps because it hadn't even been invented. Solar power is something we've come to find normal these days, and in Marston there's a big solar farm close to the A1 off Tollbar Road. Known as Marston Solar Farm, this was connected to the local distribution network on the 18th of July 2011, and ever since it's been providing power to some of the local villages. The land is owned by Westfield Farm, but the panels are owned by Lightsource Renewable Energy. It covers 12 hectares and consists of more than 19,000 solar panels which generate enough green energy to power 1,200 homes. The stats show they save around 2,210 tonnes of carbon per year as a result. Roughly, that equates to taking 688 large cars off the road annually. At the time of connection, Marston Solar Farm was one of the largest utility-scale solar farms to be constructed in the UK, but that said, Westfield Farm rents less than 1.5% of its total farmland to Lightsource, who by the way are the UK's largest solar energy generator. And its location is actually really good. Before becoming the solar farm, the land it sits on wasn't all that useful. It was Grade 3 agricultural land, which was not particularly suited to the farm's main business of growing potatoes and horticultural crops. Although the height of the panels allows for grazing, the landowners opted to leave the site as a haven for wild birds, small mammals and wildflowers. The panels are very well screened from view by the planting of additional hedgerows, which itself creates a further biodiversity gain. Westfield Farm itself has a long history of looking after the environment by taking part in schemes such as the former Countryside Stewardship Scheme. The farm is run with a strong emphasis on wildlife and keeps a constant watch on its carbon footprint. About halfway between the solar farm and the main village of Marston, there's a property that stands all on its own along Tollbar Road. This is an old barn which has been repurposed as a hotel. It used to be a Ramada, but today it's simply known as the Barn Hotel and Spa. This styles itself as one of the leading hotels in Lincolnshire. That's certainly a bold claim, but to be honest, it might not be terribly wide of the mark. It's certainly one of the best in the Grantham area, and it won't break the bank either if you choose to spend a night here. Inside, old rustic charm intertwines with remarkable hospitality. It features a collection of tastefully decorated rooms, an atmospheric restaurant, a contemporary bar, an inviting lounge, and a health spa which is at your disposal, complete with a gym and a swimming pool. There's even a sauna room too. It's the perfect place to stay if you're wanting a little bit of Lincolnshire luxury, and not a bad place to start from if you're wanting to explore Grantham or maybe Newark, which is only a few miles from here. You could even wander up to the village, like we're about to do now. Okay, here we are then in Marston village, and I'm beginning on a dead-end cul-de-sac here called Kerrs Crescent, which is absolutely beautiful actually in this autumn sunshine right now. I'll just give you a little tour of the street. We've got a tree here which is well, it had apples on it, but as you can see, most of the apples are on the floor now, so that's that. It's bungalows otherwise, as you can see, and then the exit to it is over there next to a bus stop, and when we reach that bus stop in a few seconds time, we'll take a right turn and we'll head around the village. We begin our walk on a small cul-de-sac called Kerrs Crescent, and within a few short meters we're on Main Street. Our first job is to head south to where Main Street and Tollbar Road meet Pinfold Lane. On the corner of the three, there used to be a chapel. This is known to the locals as Chapel Corner, even though the building it's named after has long since disappeared. It's been replaced with a bungalow now. It was a Wesleyan chapel that was in operation between the years of 1829 and 1965. It never had a churchyard. Little else is really known about the chapel, but its presence lives on thanks to the bungalow which is named Chapel Corner. There's also another house on Tolbar Road that's called Chapel House. Let's move on past the chapel site and down Pinfold Lane next towards the Barkston Road. Marston sits on the western bank of the River Witham, and its proximity to water made it a prime location for milling. A map published in 1792 depicts two watermills to the south of Marston village. The northerly one was called Marston Mill, and its successor survives to this day as a house. There was a second one called Marston Upper Mill, and it was further upstream. That one is a ways away from the village, but it can be accessed using Hougham Mill Lane to the south of the village. Don't be confused by that name. Marston Upper Mill would later be renamed Hougham Mill, oddly. We can walk to Marston Mill. That one is within easy walking distance of the Barkston Road. Both it and its predecessors were manorial mills owned by the Thorold family since at least the 17th century. The present mill was rebuilt in the 1850s and continued to operate until the mid-1950s. Okay, so we've come down Mill Lane here, which is a very narrow road, and there's supposed to be a footpath off to the right here, but there just appears not to be anymore, because as you can see to my right hand side you've got a wall, some trees and stuff like that. Definitely no footpath, and I don't think it goes through that house. So yeah, the mill is what I'm after, of course, and the footpath would have helped, because had it have been there I could have gone down it and taken a few long shots of the mill. As it is, this is going to be a little bit dodgy. The mill is at the end of this road, and I'm going to get right close to it to show you it. I didn't want to do this, but it is what it is. And here is the mill at the end of Mill Lane on the River Witham. After standing derelict for many years after it fell out of use, it was residentially converted in the late 1990s. There is some internal machinery remaining here though, and it appears to date from the 1850s. Robert Treadgold, born at Great Gonnerby in 1798, was listed as the tenant miller here in 1842. In the 1851 census, he was recorded as a miller and a farmer of 485 acres, and employed his son Robert and a journeyman miller called William Hardy. Robert Sr. died in May 1857, but the business continued to thrive through the prosperous high farming period. George Denton followed as the tenant miller between 1905 and 1922. He was the last miller recorded in trade directories. Even so, Marston Mill continued to be operated for provender work until the mid-1950s, and was latterly operated by an electric motor as opposed to purely river water. It was used as a store for several years before becoming derelict, but now you'd never know it was once in such a state. Yeah, I did the best I could with the mill there, quite frankly, people. Without being able to access that footpath, there's no way I could have taken the long shots. I got a couple in, and actually I spoke to the guy who lives in the mill while I was down there. He spotted me, and he said that the footpath has been blocked off now. It's been permanently blocked off by the guys who live in the house that I showed you before I started talking about the mill. So yeah, that's that anyway. Now next on our list, we've wandered to this corner. Now behind those trees is the church. We'll catch that in a little while. Next door to the church, however, is this big building. That's Marston Hall. Back to Barkston Road, and next we have Marston Hall to discuss. Located next to the church on a bend in the road, Marston Hall is a Grade 2 listed late 16th century country house. It's had a few further alterations up to and including the 18th century. Pevsner recorded a 1962 Gothic-style garden gazebo here designed by John Partridge. It had pinnacles by Christopher Blackie and murals by Barbara Jones. This was lived in by the Thorold family, the same bunch as we spoke about yesterday in Syston. They had a few properties, didn't they? The Thorolds were Vikings, originally from Malmo in southern Sweden. Some came over to England and settled in eastern areas, whilst other members moved further south and settled with many of their fellow Norsemen near Pont Audmer in Normandy. The name Thorold appears in the Domesday Book because at that time one member of the family was Sheriff of Lincoln. His sister was Lady Godiva, and of course became famous for riding through the streets of Coventry with, shall we say, a little less clothing than one should wear in a city centre. Another Thorold was a churchman who came over from Normandy in 1066 and is believed to have organised the making of the Bayeux Tapestry. He's depicted in that tapestry with his name. He was subsequently installed as Abbot of Peterborough, accompanied by a retinue of 171 armed knights. But he didn't live here. Marston's connection with the family started in 1380 when Richard Thorold acquired the hall by marriage. In more recent times, it was the home of Ernest Thorold until 1941. He was the Armed Forces chaplain and also chaplain to the king. In 1936, he was contacted by the Archbishop of Canterbury saying Edward VIII would telephone him shortly asking him to marry him and Mrs. Simpson. It's interesting to wonder what might have happened to our modern history had his reply had been an affirmative. In any event, there's been a domestic building on this site since the 10th century, making it one of the oldest in the country. We know a Saxon called Turvet lived here, but was displaced by the de Marston family at the time of the Norman conquest. The only physical evidence from that time is a Saxon cross which can still be seen at the back of the house. In 1380, Richard Thorold, who came from Selby in North Yorkshire, married the de Marston heiress, Joan, and the property has been in the family ever since. Now, of course, this isn't the house Richard knew. The original would have been pretty modest, but by the mid-14th century, the exterior would have looked much as it does now. From the front, it has the appearance of two buildings joined together, but that's deceptive. It's all one. By Tudor times, the family was prospering, and in 1577 the current porch was added with two wings, making a traditional E-shape, which was the fashion in Elizabethan times. Unfortunately, less than a century later, there was a setback in the family fortunes. The first serious engagement of the Civil War took place 2 miles away at Syston Park, and in April 1642, Oliver Cromwell rode over here and set fire to the south wing. Evidence for that is still being found in the fields around the house in the form of pistol and musket shot. William Thorold, a keen royalist who lived here at that time, was created a baronet for his part in the Civil War. Sometime later, to make the house more symmetrical, a former north wing was taken down and a house was built of the reused stone a few hundred yards down the Barkston Road. Gradually, fortunes improved, and in the mid-18th century, Sir John Thorold, the 9th Baronet, had built that splendid Palladian mansion at Syston Park. At about the same time, Marston's interior was altered and the whole house was divided into separate rooms in keeping with the times. The hall passed to the current owners John and Liz Thorold in 2001 after the death of Ernest's son Henry. He was a retired housemaster and well known as a writer of many shell guides and other books on ancient houses. He even did one on this very property. He clearly didn't like his own home. According to him, Marston Hall had a reputation for being the coldest house in England. I can assure you that now, if you step inside this grand old mansion, it's now warm and comfortable, with central heating and large open fires. Now, if you think Marston Hall is an amazing building, check this out. This is the school. Marston Thorold C of E Primary School is next on our list. This is easily one of the best Victorian buildings around this area, and it's been extended twice since the turn of the millennium. It dates from 1861 and is still somewhat supported by the Dame Margaret Thorold Educational Charity. It was Dame Margaret Thorold that founded this very school in memory of her husband Sir John Thorold in 1716. 2 years later, her charity was providing for both Marston and Syston by way of an endowment. The modern building was given a Grade 2 listing in 1984. The connection between Marston and the Thorold family is one that should definitely be recognised. The school and the hall see to it that it is, but it's also duly noted at the pub, which is the next stop on our list. On the corner of School Lane and Bridge Street is the Thorold Arms. This building has been through the mill a bit. It's a pub at the moment, but it's also been a shop, a restaurant and even a B&B. Whatever it's been in the past, it's always had a really good reputation, and so it was a sad day in Marston when it was forced to close in 2015. However, that closure didn't last for long because now it's back open after a successful campaign to purchase and reopen the pub as a community venture. The pub is now owned and managed by the Thorold Arms Community Benefit Society, which raised £210,000 to do so. They did it through community shares and were able to buy and renovate the pub in 2019 after a 3-year campaign to reopen it. It was a vital thing to this village. You see, Marston has a population that's predominantly older, with double the national average of people over 50. This pub therefore offers a range of social inclusion activities and a venue space for other local groups. Of course, it's a pub, so they also do all the other usual pub things. It even has a small shop now that sells everyday essentials. There's also an outreach post office which can be found here every Wednesday morning. Since 2020, it's all been run by Ed Faulkner, a former manager of a local hotel and golf club. Ed was instrumental in the transformation from a standard pub into a broader community space. He overhauled the menu, installed a new pizza oven, and spearheaded its lively events programme. Marston's Grade 1 listed Anglican parish church is dedicated to St Mary, and it's of 12th century origin. It has, though, a restored chancel in the early English style, which dates from 1881, designed by Kirk. St Mary's holds monuments to several members of the Thorold family. The structure that we see today consists of a west tower with an octagonal brooch spire, a nave with north and south aisles, a south porch, and that chancel with a chapel to the southeast. The porch has 3 images niches with statues, and a variety of carved heads look out from the spire. Speaking of that spire, it's a prominent landmark across the Witham from the railway to the east and the A1 to the west. The brooch spire was among the earliest types to ever be built in around the 13th century, and that's got to count for something here, right? The great mystery of the nave is the existence of the 2 vesica windows in the spandrels of the south arcade, which perhaps survive from an earlier aisleless church. In the base of one of these piers there's a reused carved Norman stone, which must be a relic of the earlier building. In the churchyard there's a charming 17th century sundial and a number of old tombs and headstones in Swithland slate. Beyond the sundial is a much celebrated laburnum tree leaning over the wall of the hall. It's considered to be the largest and oldest in England. As is normally the case in this area, there are some finely carved slate gravestones here. One mid-18th century grave to be found among them depicts old Father Time, who's standing on a plinth carrying an hourglass in one hand and a scythe in the other. The village sign stands just outside the grounds, and that features a depiction of the village school and a scene of the River Witham, with the Church of St Mary off in the distance. It's a well-placed village sign this, allowing for a photograph of the spire looming over the artist's impression of it. And if you head north from the green you've just seen there, you go towards the village hall, but that's just over the border into the next one, which we'll be covering tomorrow. So my last task, I suppose, is to go the other way. Is to head back from whence we came, pick up the car at Kerrs Crescent and make our way to the village hall. I'll see you in that one tomorrow. So there you have it, folks, that's Marston, but it's inextricably linked to the next village in a few ways. For a start, the two share a village hall, and that'll kick us off in tomorrow's episode. Join me there in 24 hours as we bring another South Kesteven run to a close. Hello folks, welcome back to South Kesteven for the last time this week. Now yesterday we saw the parish of Marston, and at the end of that episode I told you about the village hall. It's not in Marston, it's actually over the border into today's episode. And with it being a shared facility, I found my way to it. It's just here. There is said village hall. It's not just the people of Marston that use this, it's also the people of Hougham. Hougham, homestead of the enclosure on the hill. Rounding off the week in South Kesteven, we have the village and parish of Hougham, and yes, that is how you pronounce this. It's not Hougham, and it's not Hougham or Hougham. It's related to Hough on the Hill, which we covered a little while ago, and it's not far away from that actually. However, Hough on the Hill is not its closest neighbour. That honour lies with Marston, which is just under 1 mile to the south. Both parishes share a village hall, which is just on the Hougham side of the boundary. That's one thing we'll be sure to cover in this video. Hougham was the seat of several families dating back to at least the Norman conquest, if not before. It's been suggested that this was the village linked to the Saxon thane Story, who was of some significance in this bit of Lincolnshire. For sure, Hugh, the Bishop of Lincoln, had interests out here. He held land and one of the 3 manorial sites at one time, and on today's walk, we'll pass through what's believed to be the site of the manor house he was tied to. It was later taken over by the Debussy family. They would relocate to a new house at some point, which contains some 13th century fabric, suggesting it was built long before its 1620 exterior suggests. We'll get up close and personal with the Witham again in this one too, and we'll see a huge village green. It all sounds good to me, so let's go. This is what Hougham looked like in 1900, a much smaller village than neighbouring Marston. It was settled originally on the northern bank of the River Witham, with the church and the original manor house providing its historic focal points. It was later to expand northwards. It didn't go very far. In fact, Hougham only really got as far as the main road that runs through the place today, never straying far from its watery origin. It's always been a very dispersed and scattered settlement, with bits and pieces of note all over the place. On this map you can see there was a brickworks, for example, a small one located just south of the East Coast main line. Hougham had a station too on that line once upon a time, now of course disused. The village itself has never really had a defined nucleus. This is perhaps demonstrated better when we zoom in a bit more. There's a main street, yes, but in general, Hougham looks like it's the sort of village that never really knew where to base itself. Even the principal residence, the manor house, moved at some point in the Middle Ages. One thing that hasn't moved is the church. It's still there, right next to the site of the old manor house, which is shown here as a moated site. That's worth watching this whole video for. The chapel you can see marked on this map has disappeared now, evidently. Note the river here too. There are some weirs marked on this map, suggesting the Witham has a bit of character at this point. It's impossible to tell without actually going to see them, so let's see exactly how we're going to cover Hougham on the walk. As you can see, the place has hardly altered. This is the modern village and it looks practically the same. It still has the same layout of one main street with a series of dead ends off to the south. We can form a circular route here though, thanks to some handy footpaths. We'll begin at the village hall, which is quite a way away from our starting point, but after driving up to it, we'll get going here. It'll just be a case then of heading west to Coach Road via the green before walking down to the river via the church. Once there, we can use Manor Lane to return to the green because there's a network of footpaths through the old manor house site which handily take us around and over the earthworks. In all, it's a rather simple task, so let's get on and do it. So here we go then with the village hall, which is a shared facility between Hougham and Marston. For rather obvious reasons therefore, this goes by the name Hougham and Marston Village Hall. No frills stuff here, don't you know. It's got a modest history to it that took a terrible turn in 1996. The two villages used to share a previous building that was damaged by a fire in that year, and this, the current hall, was built to replace it. Modern and well equipped, it overlooks a playing field of approximately 5 acres, which also has a children's play area. The playing field is also shared with Marston, and together with the hall, they're managed by a committee made up of representatives of the various user groups from the two villages. As communal venues go, this really does do it all. It has a main hall, a stage, a kitchen, a bar, and a separate meeting room. In all, it's the perfect venue for children's parties and other celebrations, but it can even host live bands thanks to its music license. The building also has 2 changing rooms, which serve the outdoor facilities. To kick off our main walk, we're heading towards the village green. First on our list here, we're on the lookout for an old primitive Methodist chapel, but we probably won't find it. Hougham's Methodist chapel seemingly no longer exists, but it was in this sort of area I'm showing you now. The green most certainly does exist though, and this one's a beauty. For such a small village, the size of its green is really impressive. It covers a huge area between Manor Lane and Main Street. You can't park on here, so say the signs. They say note about walking on it though. Well, I think as village greens go, people, this has got to be up there with one of the biggest I've ever seen in Lincolnshire. It's massive, huge, and it's beautiful as well. And with all these autumn colours, it looks absolutely fantastic. Look at it. I just love a nice village green, me. They're fantastic. I've used that word twice now. I do overuse it, don't I? Now there's a parish notice board there, so we'll get that out of the way while we're on this green. This will be our finishing point later, because what our route will effectively do is it will go along this road you can see now and make a loop that comes out there. Let's walk on now as we start to make our way around the main roads the village has. Hougham has never really had a great deal, but it was clearly big enough and important enough to warrant both a fair and a market at one time. Both were founded in 1330, but neither exist anymore. It was also deemed important enough for the Victorians, evidently. That's because the place used to have its own railway station on the East Coast Main Line between Grantham and Newark. It closed in 1957 and it's still in situ, but it's down a private access track now and we can't get to it. Hougham had a brickworks too, just to the south of that railway line. It was never a major one, and just like the railway station, the site of it is now inaccessible to us. Industrially, farming and milling, the latter using the power of the Witham, were much more important here anyway. Hougham's name is an interesting one. It often gets mispronounced by a lot of people. Then again, so do many Lincolnshire villages. It derives from the Old English haga, meaning hedge or enclosure, and most likely references the nearby village of Hough on the Hill. Historically, the village's name is tied to the broader history of the region, which was settled by the Romans and then became part of the Danelaw. It was heavily influenced by the Kingdom of Lindsey and the central role of Lincoln. On the whole, this is a village that focuses on the residential quite a lot. Most of it is housing and it's fairly sporadically placed. There are times when you're walking through this and you think there's nothing here. A good example of that sort of feeling is to be had on Coach Road. Hougham's Church is located close to the riverbank at the end of this lane. It's dedicated to All Saints and it's built in the Norman style. It contains a notable monument to Sir Hugh de Bussy. He was, apparently, to have been senior among the members of the Knights Templar. Now that huge massive house that you've just seen with the gates, that's the rectory, and that's a surefire way to know that the church isn't far away from us. And this road that we're on, Coach Road, ends at the church gate. Turn the camera around. You won't be able to see the church because it's behind some trees, but I can just about see it, and you will too in a moment. The church is a relatively simple one despite its grand appearance. It has a 3-bay nave with side aisles, a clerestory, a tower, a chancel, a north chapel off the chancel, and a porch. The north aisle is the oldest part of the building, dating from the early 14th century. That said, much of the rest is pretty old too. The clerestory, the porch, and the first 2 stages of the tower are all of late 14th or early 15th century date. In all, this one's been here for quite some time, but there could possibly have been an older church here in Domesday times. Hougham fell in with the lands owned by Bishop Remigius of Lincoln in those days, and in the Domesday Book there is a mention of a church and a priest in this village. Unusually, the priest is named. It was Robert, a monk of Stow Priory, which owned 1 carucate of land in Hougham. Of course, the Victorians couldn't leave this church alone, and so looking at it now, you're seeing a lot of work from the 1840s. Restorations by Gilbert Scott in 1844 and Temple Moore in 1895 give it its modern appearance. At least it had 2 of the best for such work, right? The best piece of evidence for their work is in the Georgian-style chancel. It was added to the building in the 18th century before their time, but the east window, built in the Venetian style, is attributed to Moore's restoration in the 1890s. From the churchyard, it's possible here to access the River Witham. At this point along its course, there's a series of weirs marked on several maps. The trouble is, none of those maps, not even the overhead Google Earth type jobs, show you exactly what they look like. So there's only one way to find out. Well, weirs plural is actually only one, I think. This one. It's more of a sluice gate than a weir though, isn't it? I'm just trying to see if there's some more along the river this way, but I can't see anything. I think it's mainly just the river. Unless there's another one the other side. We can actually stand on top of this, so we'll go and have a look. We'll have a look and see if there's more than just this weir. It's definitely powerful. Can you hear it? Can you hear the rushing water? It's a great noise, that. I love it. Back on dry land, the next thing to see on this walk is the manor house. In fact, there are 2 manor houses to see, although one of them is just a series of earthworks now. The current house was built in 1620, but it sits both on and close to the site of a much older building. Originally, the manor house was here. All that remains of it now is this very well preserved moat, still discernible among the fields beside both the church and the river. I have to say, in terms of earthworks, this is probably one of the best moated sites I've ever seen. As to who lived here, well, there are several names that this was associated with. Given the close proximity to the church, it's possible that the moat occupies the site of a pre-conquest hall, which belonged to Story, who was a thane of some local importance in Saxon times. By 1089 things were a bit clearer, but not by much. There were 3 land holdings in Hougham belonging to Coleswain, Countess Judith, and Hugh, the Bishop of Lincoln. It's thought, but not known for sure, that this manor house was held by the latter of those 3. During the Middle Ages, this manorial site was the principal residence for the Debussy family. It's not known for sure when this was abandoned in favour of the newer manor house site a few yards away, but it had definitely moved away by the middle of the 13th century. We'll explain how we know that in a moment. In any event, the moat surrounding the old manor house survives on 3 sides to the south, west and east of the modern house, forming an enclosure 70 metres wide. Parts of the moat have been infilled now, and a tennis court now occupies the southeastern corner of the island. In addition to these earthworks, there's a group of 3 sub-rectangular fish ponds which lie approximately 30 metres to the east of the moat. The easternmost pond is aligned north to south, and the others are aligned east to west. All 3 were around 1.5 metres deep. So this is the modern manor house, and no, don't worry, you're not trespassing if you walk this close to it here. There's a public right-of-way that crosses the old earthworks and emerges onto Manor Lane, so you can get a decent view of this house perfectly legally. As stated before, this was built in 1620 and much of the current building still dates from that period. However, there can be no doubt that this house sits on something far older. In fact, a lot of its fabric predates the early 17th century by some margin. Inside, there are some significant Norman and 13th century features, including corbelled half pillars and even a Norman window. This proves, to some extent, that the Debussys must have abandoned the original site at some point after 1200. They were almost certainly living here in 1405. Proof for that comes in the form of a record that tells us they owned a manor house and an oratory, and the latter was licensed in that year. The actual exact age of this house may never be known, but it's certainly ancient, far older than its 1620 exterior may suggest. After that quick trot up Manor Lane, we've come to the final landmark on this walk. This is the old village water pump opposite the green. It no longer works, and so now it's little more than just a glorified monument, a memento of past days when water wasn't obtained by simply turning on a tap. Well, I've definitely saved the best while last this week, haven't I? This place is absolutely fantastic. When I put this run together this week, I thought maybe this one was going to be the one that was going to be the quickest. There wasn't going to be much to see, no landmarks of any real note. But I'm telling you now, this has absolutely blown me away. Walking through the Hougham Manor estate there, just beautiful, absolutely fantastic. I've used that word again, haven't I? Also fantastic, of course, is the green, and this is our last task, to cross the green to go back to where we started. What a beautiful village Hougham is. And that's that for another batch of South Kesteven parishes. With it, we also complete the district for 2025. I'll be back next year, and by the end of that, this one will be finished. Join me for the remaining 49 South Kesteven parishes in 2026. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.